A Watcher's Duty by Nim P. Sudo. Chapter 10. The doors of the Spire Theater whimpered as they parted, giving way to a wall of darkness. Lurien stepped inside, claws outstretched in search of a lever. He found one and yanked with all his strength. Despite the rust, it gave way, and the lumafly lights overhead convulsed. Slowly, they bloomed to life, at least some of them. A sparse constellation formed in the rafters, interspersed with lightless bulbs stained yellow-brown by lumafly corpses. Lurien picked at a seam in his robes as he surveyed the theater. He could not recall the last time he'd visited, and from the looks of it, every last attendant in the spire would say the same. A growl slipped free as he resolved to seek out the labor logs and censure those responsible for this theater's maintenance. He drifted down the middle aisle, flanked by a dozen rows of chairs with burgundy cushions. Some of the chairs had been covered by enormous gray sheets, a half-finished bulwark against neglect. He ran a claw over the fabric. It left a white trail like shoveling mold off a marble floor. A list of suitable punishments began forming in his mind. There was a hiss, a snap of liberated cloth, and then a deluge of coughing. Lurien turned to see Hornet in the act of cloaking herself with a sheet. She twirled erratically, casting a festive dust cloud throughout the room. The vessel stood behind her, unfazed by the sudden shower. Gray clumps collected upon its head. Hornet's face emerged from her makeshift hood. "Why is it so dusty in here? She paused to hack, her whole body shuddering. "Isn't the spire supposed to be all clean and proper?" "That is the expectation," Lurien said. He wiped his claws clean and approached the stage. The main curtain, a rippling ruby red affair, seemed to be the only thing in this place that yet retained any dignity. He attempted to part it down the middle, but the folds were lead-heavy, so he circled around. The backstage was in no finer shape than the auditorium. A lone lumafly bulb shone weakly upon the disorder. To Lurien, the place gave the impression of a thicket, of somewhere deep and tangled, rarely traveled by civilized bugs. Ropes hung from the batten like vines. Miscellaneous props crowded the corners like overgrowth. He waded deeper in, half expecting to hear the trill of a moss creep or the hum of a squit. On the far wall, a pulley caught his attention. It rose into the dark, presumably connecting to the track that controlled the curtain. Though winded by this point, Lurien hastened over. He tugged experimentally, and then upon making no progress, leveraged his entire body weight. After a pause, every wheel on the track leapt into a hellish chorus, and the curtain began to part. Light from the auditorium fell upon the backstage in a broadening pillar, and with it came a throb of hope. Perhaps this play could yet be managed. Perhaps, with enough moil, the theater would be returned to some semblance of function. Who could say? After this, perhaps theater performances would become a regular occurrence in the spire. Lurien continued to pull, limbs burning, breath heaving. A sharp, percussive sound carried over the track wheels, and he realized Hornet was applauding, her sinuous arms lifted high to be free of the sheet. He managed half a chuckle, then the curtain tore free of its mounting and slammed onto the shellwood stage with all the force of a toppling building. A great gush of dust and debris shot into the air, blinding Lurien. He stumbled back, coughing and cursing. The sound of the impact echoed for several painful seconds, a mocking testament to the theater's excellent acoustics. Once the air had stilled, Hornet redoubled her applause. "Amazing! Do it again! Do it again!" Lurien descended from the stage in a storm. What utter negligence! Was the spire not equipped with a battalion of menderbugs? Was it so tall a task to oil a curtain track once in an eon? He would see bloody vengeance done on those attendants, whoever they were. He would have them be made to sharpen quills for a month, to trim every solitary petal in the garden, to bathe the Watcher Knights. Hornet halted her applause. Was that not supposed to happen? Lurien made it halfway to the theater's entrance before the bluster drained out of him. He took 2 agonizing steps and sat down on the lone, clean chair that Hornet had uncovered. But what point was there in punishment, really? What occasion in the Spire's history had even required the theater at all? It was vestigial. All in the Spire knew that. Who would have felt compelled to maintain it? Certainly not himself. Lurien removed his mask and put his face in his claws. It was bad enough that he hadn't so much as penned a title for this play. But now there wasn't even a theater to present it in. This was the end. In a matter of days, Soulmaster would realize he'd been deceived. His suspicions, his meddling, would increase tenfold, and he'd unearth the truth about the children. What would come of that, Lurien dreaded to contemplate. Hornet Sheet hissed over the carpet as she padded close. "Are you okay?" she asked. Mirth suddenly swallowed. "Yes, I am unharmed," Lurien said. His voice came muffled through his claws. "No, I mean, are you okay?" Lurien lifted his head and gave her a hard look. Hornet doffed her sheet, then kicked it under a chair. "Look, it's not so bad. So what if it's dusty? That won't hurt anyone. And the curtain is fine. We can just put it back up, and—" A quartet of rusted gears fell from the curtain track and struck the stage, landing with a bang, one after the other like the first bar of a ghastly concert. Hornet grew quiet. She seemed to be formulating a new argument. Not wanting to allow her the time, Lurien reaffixed his mask and stood. "Follow me, children." He did not know exactly where he was going, or what he intended to do, but remaining in this ruin was not an option. He glanced around for the vessel. It was almost predictably absent. He waited for the usual barb of panic to pierce his chest, but it did not come. He was thankful for that, at least. Was this a sign of his growing experience as a caretaker? Or his apathy? He couldn't say. Just as he was about to enlist Hornet's aid in searching, Belvedere's voice carried faintly through the theater's doors. He seemed to be reciting something. Lurien stepped outside into the library to behold the vessel wrapped in a dusty sheet of its own. It was seated before a reading chair, occupied by Belvedere. In his claws, Belvedere held a long, beaten scroll. He read from it with a grave authority, modulating his timbre as he voiced different characters. "Enter stage left, the king riding upon a stag." Belvedere cleared his throat and feigned a baritone. "What happiness to reign a lonely king! Vexed, O ye stars that shudder over me! O earth that soundest hollow under me! Vexed with waste dreams! For saving I be joined to the lady that is the fairest under heaven. I seem as nothing in the mighty world, and cannot will my will, nor work my work wholly, nor make myself in mine own realm victor and lord. But were I joined with her, then might we live together as one life, and reigning with one will in everything, have power on this dark land to lighten it, and power on this dead world to make it live." A vague remembrance stirred in Lurien. He tried to place the line. "The vision of the king?" he asked. Belvedere paused mid-sentence and looked up, eyes twinkling. "Quite so, Watcher. Your memory is as sharp as ever." Grandiloquent language of that magnitude is difficult to forget. "Oh, come now. The vision is a classic." Lurien shrugged. With care, Belvedere rolled up the scroll and placed it beside several others on a small reading table. "So," he began, a charlatan's air of ease about him, "how did your bout with Soulmaster go?" "As well as I had predicted. He will be lodging with us for the time being." Lurien walked over and removed the sheet from the vessel's shoulders. It looked up at him, revealing a face speckled by dust motes. Impatiently, he swept the vessel's face clean. It did not flinch. "Word around the library is that a play is in production," Belvedere said. "One about Soulmaster himself. This comes as no small surprise, as I wasn't privy to any such plans before being furloughed. It is expected within the week, correct?" "Word travels quickly," Lurien observed. "Like fire through a scriptorium." Belvedere lifted another scroll. It was titled Dramatic Theory for the Novice. He skimmed through it, nodding as though revisiting an old favorite. Has a playwright been commissioned for this project? I could write it, Hornet blurted, suddenly at Lurien's shoulder. She held a bent gear from the curtain track and was trying to force it back into shape. How hard could it be? Lurien ignored her. As of yet, no. Belvedere craned his neck to get a glimpse of the theater. Even from here, the fallen curtain was clearly visible. Is the stage in operating order? It is under maintenance. Not the most auspicious sign, Belvedere said. This production will surely demand a heroic deal of work to reach completion on time. It is a pity I can't offer any help. As you know, I am much too occupied with reading. Lurien squared his shoulders and took a deep breath. Very true. I will not keep you any longer then. Enjoy your leisure. He nodded at the children to follow him and strode off. After a beat, Belvedere leapt from the chair, sending Dramatic Theory for the Novice fluttering away. He took Lurien's claw in both of his and knelt like a courtier making a pledge. Oh, enough with pretense. Grant me this task, I beseech you. All this idleness is driving me mad. As Watcher, it is your onus to delegate excess responsibility. Do so. Foisting my every woe onto you seems a poor way of delegation. Belvedere made some flustered noises and tightened his grip into a vice. I have managed stricter deadlines with greater consequence before. Who else but I could even be trusted to see this through in time? Look! He groped blindly at the scrolls strewn over the table, snatching one of them up and presenting it as a holy relic. I've all the resources necessary right here. I could begin this very instant. In the full span of your life, how much of it has been devoted to theater? An hour? An entirely sufficient amount, I assure you. Lurien growled dubiously, but Hornet took him by the other claw. Come on, let Mr. Belvedere do it. I'll help him. A sudden claustrophobic feeling fell upon Lurien. Enough then. Fine, fine. He wrenched his claws free and stepped back. You are hired, Belvedere, as playwright, director, stage manager, and whatever else necessary. Does that please you? Are you satisfied with this rock slide of obligation? In a flash, Belvedere was back on his feet, shell straight, voice even, as though the last minute had never occurred. Positively ecstatic, Watcher. I shall begin immediately. He produced a small silk sack from a pocket in his uniform and shoveled the scrolls from the reading table into it. You may expect a preliminary draft of the first act by this evening. I must inform the Menderbugs about the theater's condition. He bowed deeply, then shouldered the sack and set off through the library, a living dynamo if Lurien had ever seen one. As Belvedere diminished, Lurien shook his head. Another verbal duel, another embarrassing defeat. It seemed he could not shield anyone from harm, not even the self-inflicted sort. He thought of the king, of the many perilous tasks he had entrusted to his eager knights. Did those edicts weigh on him, too? Hornet began to set after Belvedere, presumably to make good on her offer, but Lurien caught her by the cloak. Hold now, he said. It is best you leave that one to his own devices for now. If he requires your aid, he will solicit it. But you gave him like 4 jobs. How's he going to do them all alone? King only knows, Lurien said, but I have no doubt they will be done. For now, however, we have other concerns. Our guest will surely expect a banquet in his honor, and the chefs must be warned. Hornet started to protest, but another thought came to her, and she nodded slyly. Okay. They made haste for the kitchen, and the vessel trailed after them, the vision of the king clasped to its chest.